Russell Wilson is an 11-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, and was consistently a top 3 quarterback in the NFL from 2013 to 2020. But Russell Wilson has never won an NFL MVP, or even gotten an MVP vote. But why? There are a few reasons, but first, Russell Wilson played for the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks aren't a historic franchise and weren't even a good franchise before Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, and the Legion of Boom showed up. Therefore, people weren't as interested in Seattle in comparison to more popular franchises like the Steelers, Patriots, or Broncos. But people eventually came up with the idea that Russ was only being carried by the Legion of Boom. And this may have been true in 2012 to 2014, even though I believe Russ played a major factor on those great Seattle teams. But what people don't understand was this quickly changed. This all-time defense evaporated quickly, leaving Russell Wilson to carry a franchise on his own. Russell was the definition of consistency, continuing to put up some of the best numbers for a QB in the NFL each year, as well as dragging some pretty awful Seahawks teams to the playoffs. But because the Seattle Seahawks are from the Pacific Northwest and their games didn't come on until too late on the East Coast, NFL news coverage and social media didn't do Russell Wilson justice, as he typically fell under the radar, making him extremely underrated as people still thought Russ was being carried by a defense, even though the stats said otherwise. The next reason is that the MVP award stands for Most Valuable Player, but it isn't actually awarded in this way. The MVP isn't given to the most valuable player to their team in the league. It is instead given to the player or quarterback with the best stats out of the top 2 to 3 teams in the league. So was Russell Wilson ever truly the MVP, but just cheated out of it? Yes. In 2017, Russell Wilson broke an NFL record for literally being the most valuable player to their team's offense in league history. Out of Seattle's 5,286 yards of offense, Wilson alone accounted for 4,571 of them. This demolished the old NFL record as he accounted for an astonishing 86% of the Seahawks' total offensive output. That's not even the craziest stat though. In one game against the Texans, the Seahawks offense put up 479 yards total, and Wilson? He put up 482, meaning that Russ was responsible for over 101% of the Seahawks' total yards in that game. Russell also led the league in touchdown passes that season with 34. He also ran in 3 out of the Seahawks' 4 total rushing touchdowns, meaning he accounted for 37 out of their 38 total touchdowns. So why didn't Russell Wilson win it in that season? Well, the Seahawks finished with a 9-8 record, narrowly missing out on the playoffs, but this was still impressive, hosting one of the worst defenses in the NFL, along with one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL. But who won the MVP?
This would be Tom Brady, who threw for 4,577 yards, had 32 total touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions with a passer rating of 102.8. While Tom Brady had a great season, throwing for more yards than Wilson, when you combine Russ's rushing yards, they had similar yardage amounts. Russ had 5 more touchdowns, and Russ only threw 3 more interceptions. So it was really a close race between the two. But because Tom Brady had more wins because he was on a better team, Tom Brady ended up winning the NFL MVP.
The third reason Russell Wilson never won an MVP was because every year Russell Wilson deserved an MVP, someone else had an incredible season or carried their team to an incredible record. The seasons where this occurred were 2015, 2019, and 2020. First, we'll start with 2015. Russell Wilson's stats in this season were 4,024 passing yards, 34 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, along with 553 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown, as well as a passer rating of 110.1. You may look at these stats and say this was a great season, and it was. But what made it really special was he finished off the last 7 weeks of the season throwing for 24 touchdowns and only 1 interception. But the season got off to a horrific start, as Russ threw for 10 touchdowns and 7 interceptions in the first 9 games, leading the Seahawks to be 4-5. But still, Russell Wilson had the Seahawks going into the playoffs as a top 3 team in the NFC, playing the hottest football in the NFL. So what went wrong? Enter Cam Newton, who had one of the most dominant NFL seasons for a quarterback in league history. Cam helped carry the Panthers to a 15-1 record, posting a stat line of 3,837 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, and only 10 interceptions. He also ran for 636 yards and 10 touchdowns, posting a passer rating of 99.4. Cam Newton's season took the spotlight as the Panthers were dominating teams week in and week out. But when you really compare the stats, Cam didn't play much better than Russ, if he outplayed him at all. He simply just had more rushing touchdowns because he was a bigger quarterback who ran it near the goal line. So why did Cam Newton win the MVP? What's the wow factor? Cam Newton's dominance took the league by storm, being a former number 1 overall pick on a bad franchise that helped lead them to a 15-1 season and a Super Bowl. And this was enough in the voters' eyes. Well, this and the record. You see, the team with the best record in the NFL typically has the MVP on their roster in most cases. These two reasons, the wow factor and the best record, will continually appear throughout Russ's career, preventing him from winning the MVP or even getting a vote. The next season was the 2019 NFL season. Russell Wilson posted a stat line of 4,110 passing yards with 31 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions. He also ran for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns, posting a passer rating of 106.3. These are unreal numbers of efficiency for an NFL quarterback. So what happened in 2019? Russell Wilson started off the season hot, looking like one of the best quarterbacks in league history. Through the first 9 weeks of the season, Russell Wilson had thrown for 22 touchdowns and only 1 interception, leading the Seahawks to a 7-2 record. At this point in the season, Russell Wilson was a lock for the MVP, but something happened. Down the stretch, he would only throw for 9 touchdowns and 4 interceptions in the final 7 games of the regular season, allowing Lamar Jackson to catch back up. The Ravens started the season 0-2 and then finished the regular season winning 14 games straight. Lamar took the league by storm, throwing for 3,127 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. Lamar also showed out on the ground, rushing for 1,206 yards and 7 touchdowns. So when you compare the stats, what do you notice? Lamar had the better season slightly. Therefore, since Lamar was on the team with the better record and wowed the rest of the NFL, he won NFL MVP, ripping away yet another chance for Russell Wilson to win the Most Valuable Player award. But you may say, Russ had a good enough season, he should have gotten a vote, right? Well, no. Lamar won the MVP unanimously for only the second time in NFL history. So that takes us into 2020. Russell Wilson is now officially in his prime. He's one of the favorites before the season starts to win MVP, but the competition is incredible. You have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Tom Brady, and oh yeah, Aaron Rodgers. But this was Wilson's year. The entire NFL fan base had been chanting, "Let Russ cook" all offseason, as throughout Wilson's entire career, Seattle had continually ran the ball more than any other team in the NFL, consistently running it on first down as well. And as you'd expect, this would make a quarterback's numbers worse in comparison to teams who threw it more often. This obviously held Wilson back from putting up the gaudy numbers needed for MVP, as in the present-day NFL, you would need to throw for nearly 40 touchdowns to win MVP, thanks to the new dynamic passing attack that was taking the league by storm. And Seattle actually let him do it. In Week 1 against the Falcons, Russell Wilson went 31 for 35 for 322 yards and 4 touchdowns, defeating the Falcons by a score of 38-25. But could he keep it up? Well, yeah. In Week 2, Seattle had to play one of the best defenses in the NFL, led by Defensive Player of the Year Stephon Gilmore, and Russ threw for 288 yards and 5 touchdowns. He did throw a pick, however, but Seattle still won 35-30. Next up, he was facing the Dallas Cowboys, yet again one of the better teams in the league. Russell Wilson would throw for 315 yards and 5 touchdowns, beating Dallas in yet another one-score game, 38-31. In Week 4, they played the Dolphins, and Russell threw for 360 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Not his greatest performance, but still extremely solid. Seattle won another one-score game, 31-23. Next up was the Vikings. Russell threw for 217 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception, narrowly defeating the Vikings 27-26. Seattle was now 5-0. Looking like one of the best teams in the NFL thanks to Russell Wilson's incredible play with the receivers Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. But next up, it was the Arizona Cardinals, a division rival. In this game, Russell Wilson threw the ball 50 times. Yes, you heard that right. 50 times, something that had never been seen before with the Seahawks. And this caused him to lose by 3 points, as Russ had thrown for 388 yards and 3 touchdowns, but throwing the ball so often led him to also throw 3 picks. But it was all good, because next week they played the 49ers, a division rival who is in Super Bowl contention yet again, and Russ would throw for 261 yards and 4 touchdowns with no picks. Russ was cooking. 8 games into the season, Russ was on pace to tie or beat Peyton Manning's record for the most TD passes in one season in NFL history. And Russ was at 26 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. One more interception from the previous season, but this was expected with how often they were throwing the ball. But could Russ keep it up? I don't know if you've noticed by now, but each game was close. So even though Russ was playing the best ball of his career, he didn't have any help from his defense at all, as they were one of the worst in the league up to this point. So in week 9, the Seahawks played the Bills and were throttled due to this awful defense and Russ's turnovers. Russ finished the day throwing for 390 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. In week 10, they also fell at the hands of the Rams in yet another one-score game due to Russ turning the ball over 2 more times. It was starting to become obvious that if Seattle was going to win, Russell had to play perfect, and Pete Carroll and other teams around the league began to pick up on this. Teams began to run exclusively 2 high safeties on the Seahawks due to fear of Russell Wilson's incredible moonball. This and the fear of turnovers costing them games led Pete Carroll to shift the offensive game plan. He began to take the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands and go back to the run-heavy approach that he'd used throughout his coaching career. Russ went on to finish the final 6 games, only throwing 10 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, not having a game in which he threw for over 300 yards for the rest of the season. This was extremely low in comparison to how he started this season. This plan worked though in Pete Carroll's eyes, as Seattle's defense improved, being on the field less, and they would win 5 out of their final 6 games. But it infuriated Russ as it cost him his chance to win NFL MVP and resulted in an early playoff exit to the Rams, as Seattle couldn't score with this run-heavy approach. Then, Russell Wilson had to sit and watch the Super Bowl with the commissioner in a game where he watched Tom Brady take a new team with a loaded roster to a Super Bowl championship, in which he was able to run the system that he wanted to run. And this was the beginning of the end for Russell Wilson's time in Seattle. He would eventually be traded in a blockbuster trade to the Denver Broncos, where he was asked to save a franchise whose roster was overhyped. And he had to do this with a new coach in Nathaniel Hackett, who turned out to be one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. Russell Wilson battled injuries in his first season in Denver, but played anyways, causing his reputation to be ruined, as he had a horrific season in Denver. The next season, the Broncos would hire Sean Payton, and we know what happened between Russell Wilson and Sean Payton. This led to him being cut by the Denver Broncos, who took on the largest dead cap hit in NFL history. Russell ended up being signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he once again battled injuries and played on a roster that wasn't very talented. This led to a late season collapse. However, Russell Wilson showed flashes of the former all-pro quarterback he once was. Now, he is set to become a free agent for the 2025 NFL season, and although Russ's career seems far from over, due to media's hatred for him and the immense amount of talent in the league, it would be hard to imagine Russell will be given a chance to win an NFL MVP, especially considering the teams he could go to don't have very great rosters. But what do you think? Do you think Russell Wilson should have won an NFL MVP in his career? Or do you think he was robbed and will go down as the best player to never win an NFL MVP? I know it's definitely between him and Drew Brees.